Rick Hale. How
What's
are you,
going
my
on?
friend?
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful sunny morning, as you
Sunny.
might notice. I'm
Yes.
getting blasted by sunshine. And anyone ever wake up and complain about that? Hopefully
No,
not.
never.
Hopefully
Never.
not. Beautiful day to be alive.
I mean, it's all a perspective, right? But the reality is sun is life, right? And sun is it adds brightness to our lives and brightness on a Mojo Monday, my friend. Well, we
Absolutely.
are in the middle of this Jack Canfield's Success Principles, which it's an older book and it's been redone a couple times over the years, but it's one of those classic books that I believe everybody should have on their shelf. And it's timeless, right?
100%. In fact, I was listening to, re-listening. I hadn't picked it up in a long time, maybe a decade or more, 20 years. And as you know, I wrote a book and I think I need to send him a thank you note because a lot of who I am and how I see things and how I interface with the world is straight out of his teachings. And I've professed many times 20 years ago when I read it the first time, it was life changing. It was new information at the time. And it's amazing how many things have become mine over time because I heard it, then I acted on it, and then it was reinforced by a positive outcome. And that I think by definition is personal growth. And that's our purpose in being here.
I love that. Well, we're last week we did a different principle, but this week we're going to do be clear why you're here. Last week
Mm.
was take 100% responsibility, being a personally accountable, right? And the second success principle here is be clear why you're here. Why don't you set the stage for us, Rick?
I mean, the short answer to that and what we talk about in our vernacular regularly is big why. What is your why? What's your purpose? What was your, if you're spiritual, what was God or what is that spiritual reason? And then if you're not, then you still have a physical experience. And what does that physical experience speak to you? How does it speak to you? What does it speak to you? And where should you be traveling and going? Because one thing we're clear on this channel and what we talk about is that, what you aim your sights on becomes bigger, so it expands. And if you're not moving forward, you're not moving at all. And if you want to move towards enlightenment and more self-love, you have to evolve into something that's that better person and that better version.
Love it. You know, there's a question at the beginning of this that says, what were you put on this earth to do?
Mm.
And that question almost comes off a little bit cliche or like one of those questions that, I don't know, somebody smart might ask us to ponder. Yet we're asking you, our listeners, to ponder this question this week is, what were you put on this earth to do? And the comment I would throw at this is, this is one of those questions you got to spend a little time with. You're not going to just have an answer to this question if you've never spent any time kind of self-assessing yourself. So it may take a while. It's a big
Mhm.
question if you take on the assignment. Yet what you were put on this earth to do is so powerful. Rick, what would you say?
It kind of lends itself to the conversation around what's your identity.
Yeah.
And I would say, it, first reflect on what your identity was in the past, and then give yourself credit you give yourself credit, that simple, for how you've evolved and where you are, because your identity of the past as a, maybe grade school, middle school, high school, college, beyond, adult career changes. One thing's for sure, the only constant is change. And one cautionary tale is once you recognize your identity today, just realize seasons of life and there's an evolution of circumstances that may not be the identity of your future. In fact, it probably shouldn't be the identity of the future. And so that's the conversation. What were you here? Why are you here? And where are you going? And I think it starts with your identity and recognizes what are my skills and what am I passionate about? And then do some reflective thinking.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the conversations we could circle around this question is you exist whether you understand this or not. Meaning you wake up every day, you go through the motions, you do things that either move you towards joy or away from joy. But at the end of the day, you exist. And there's, I think, a different level to our lives when we actually start to spend time and get some clarity around what we were put on this earth to do. And we challenge people to discover their big why. Yet, Rick, you and I've talked many, many times around how big that discovery is. And a lot of times it's the little discoveries along the journey that actually are more productive in helping you discover this big the shining sun coming in the window of what you were put on this earth to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you to your point, that whole proverbial eat an elephant, how do you do it? And I think big why is the elephant in the room. It's that, and there's something probably buried in your heart and mind that it, when uncovered, becomes an inspired thought. And it might lead you to changes in your perspective and trajectory, and maybe even your sphere of influence and the people that you choose to spend your time with based on that acknowledgement. But for many in coaching, I've coached hundreds just like you, maybe thousands of people. It's not common that someone walks in and goes, "My big why is,"
Nah.
and if they do, but if they do, it's often seasonally driven. My big why is to be the best father or mother or parent or friend or advocate for wealth building and real estate, figure whatever that is. But then you kind of go, that's awesome, and that's now. Be careful, because one day that may not be the same, it may not have the same value and the same purpose built future statement that you'd want it to. And
Yeah.
my advice there is back to your point, if it's not one thing, maybe it's built around this whole life wheel. If you go to rickhale.com, you can download it. But it's got 12 spokes, and big whys are sometimes just small whys stacked end to end, and recognizing where you are and where you want to be and defining that gap.
Yeah. Gary Keller challenged us, one of our mentors, over the last couple of years. He says, I want you to answer the question, who am I? And you can't say parent, mother, father, son, or profession. And how would you answer the
Yeah.
question, who am I, if you couldn't use the label that we typically use when answering that question? And it really is a deep question, just like what were you put on this earth here to do? And, we typically like to just define ourselves by our identity, but sometimes that identity gets in the way. And I think it is powerful to have an identity because it speaks to self-worth, it speaks to self-image. Yet sometimes that identity becomes so strong it actually keeps us from elevating to something bigger and greater, right?
Yeah, well, you create sacred space and margin in your life when you redefine your identity, because, everyone knows this. We're creatures of habit. Whatever, and just because it's worked in the past may not work in the future. And if it, in that whole, what is the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and
Yeah.
expecting a different result? That's not how life works. If you do the same thing, you'll get the same thing. And so, to your point about identity, um, what if it could only be an adjective and not an adverb, and not the things you do, but the who, but really what you are, or who you are, and how does that then mirror, reflect your peer group, your sphere, your world?
Yeah.
That's a fascinating approach to looking at this. And back to that breaking things down, the only way I can imagine creating a better version of myself was to first own where you are, and then maybe think in terms of, a bucket list of what does the future hold? Because until you can identify it, it's really difficult to track a strategy to then do things differently to create a different outcome. And so Jack brings this up in the book, do a be have, or have do be. He does it in that order, which is interesting to me. But first, what are the things you want to have? Maybe pull out a sheet of paper and list 30 things you want to have. The next is do. What are 30 things you want to do in the next season or before your last breath? And then the last is, who do you want to become? Which is really the deeper, better question, because who you become is impacted by the things you chase in terms of have, and the things you do in terms of experiences. Especially when you realize you kind of lasso the people in your world into that circle of experiences. And so it becomes highly relational in who you become. And then,
Absolutely. The thing is that the second talking point really today is how powerful having clarity in your purpose really is. And it doesn't mean you're disempowered if you don't have clarity in your purpose. It just means you're that much more powerful if you have it. And, having that power and clarity, it gives you, like I said, we all exist and we all wake up and go through what we believe are the right things to do every day. Yet the power of the clarity in your purpose gives it meaning.
yeah,
And that I could go teach a class, or I could go uh, perform a transaction in business, but the meaning from that comes from me having power in my clarity of purpose. And then that means that that transaction or that class or whatever that activity I did is feeding me feedback as a human around, hey, I'm living into my purpose. And it gives it that really deep meaning.
yeah. I mean, the gift of a life well lived is the journey and the journey of becoming a better version, which is ultimately what purpose, that's our purpose, is to
Yeah.
become a better version. And again, whether you want to or not, that's still an inherent purpose. And then I think the bottom line is, do you love yourself more or less because you're actually living and taking action with a purposeful statement around who you're becoming? Um, this is a deep conversation with
It is a
yourself.
deep
That's what it
conversation.
boils down to. And I'm trying to keep it simple, and it's not always simple.
Well, I
Um,
think I think the thing, if we were to throw out our challenge for the week, the challenge really is to spend some time with this week. What were you put on this earth to do? And I don't expect you to solve the math equation. I don't expect you to solve the life puzzle here. I expect you to move the needle closer to it. And I think we don't ever fully solve it because I think, as you pointed out, we go through seasons of life at some point in time when you're raising kids. I'm assuming your clarity of purpose is very driven on your role in that stage of life. But at some point in time, those kids leave the house, and then maybe your power of clarity is centered around your kids' or whatever. But phases of life will change just as we age. But I still think there's an underlining theme
yeah.
that most people have that is consistent through their life of what they were put on this earth to do.
Agreed. And just in the same vein of your role, even at work, if you've got to, like, for instance, me as an example, a few years ago, I made the conscious decision to replace myself in my operating partner role with our company. And you were my chosen partner. And I'm super excited that you accepted the challenge. And we've become really great friends and we're doing really good work. And every day is a new challenge and a new opportunity. But until I made the decision to amend my behavior and create margin, I didn't have the capacity to replace that with something that was even more fulfilling and gave me more feedback that really filled that purpose statement, which is to impact others outside of our organization. And it led me to writing a book, and it's led me back to music, and I've created enough margin that music and art are part of the equation. And it's not because it's all about earning, extra money, if you will, or the check boxes that are my identity today, and being uncomfortable and relinquishing certain behavior that is your current identity, but not that future better self identity. And so
Well,
as you
yeah.
kind of work through this process, think about that. What is my highest and best identity, and is my current circumstance feeding it?
Isn't there a stat that talks about people that retire, quote unquote, uh, and don't and lose purpose for their life when they retire, die quicker? I'm roughly going at a statistic that I read years ago, but basically that the concept of what you're explaining is their whole identity was wrapped up in what they did for a profession, so that much that when they were no longer in that profession, they didn't have power of clarity of purpose, and they just withered away.
Well, and at some point
That's
it doesn't
sad.
get it
Yeah.
is sad and it doesn't get easier. If you don't pack a parachute now and you don't decide when you're going to jump out of the plane and where you're going to land, it may not be where you want to be. And at some point, it might be too late to reinvent yourself or to take the time to build the skills and build, your arsenal of your network so that when you do transition in the next season, you're already ready, man. You're armed and dangerous in positive ways.
There
And
you
that's
go.
what I would encourage everyone to think about today. And I think it goes back to creating that, three lists, have, do, and be, so that you can get really clear. Am I on the right path? And what has to change in order to make sure that you land in the winner's circle in the next season of life? And so that you're taking small pieces or bite-sized pieces today that are easy to swallow so that you don't wake up one day with this Mount Everest in front of you wondering, how am I going to climb that?
Yeah. Rick, we do this Mojo Monday, and the purpose behind it is to make a difference. And I just want to say thank you for listening, because this is a deep conversation. And I think we're over 100 and something episodes of Mojo Monday at this point.
Yeah.
And our goal is simply to make a difference in your life. So if you're tuned in and listening, we appreciate participation. And I appreciate you if you take the challenge of moving the needle.
Yeah.
Move the needle on this topic this week, and it makes it all worth it.
It does. And the biggest challenge is keeping one eye on the present and one eye on the future, and then making sure that your path leads you to that greatest version again, as we've said. So thanks a bunch, man. I appreciate you in my life, Brett, and all of those listening. This is probably the biggest question you can ask yourself as you stare down the next season of life.
There you go. Rick, what day is it?
It's Mojo Monday.